Good evening and welcome back to Empty Cloud Monastery. So we're here this evening with Aya Brahmavara, our delightful British bhikkhuni, well, Irish-British bhikkhuni. And my name is Bhante Sudaso, and we're here at Empty Cloud Monastery for our regular weekly monk chat, our weekly opportunity to answer any random questions you might have about Buddhism. So I see there's a few questions already appearing in the chat window, and you're welcome to please continue typing in questions. As long as there are questions, we will keep giving answers. When there are no more questions, there will be no more answers and the stream will end. So please type in your questions and we'll answer them as we see them. And we'll go ahead and start at this time with paying homage to the Buddha, and then we'll start going through the questions. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So first off, hello to all the people who have checked in so far. So hello to Joseph, Suzanne, Dharmika, Karen, Jason, John, Mary, Karuna, and Julie. Good to see you joining in online. And we have a couple questions here. This first one is from Joe. He says, does an insect gain negative karma if it crawls over a Buddha statue? Is it disrespectful regardless of intent? I would assume it would be blessed. Please clarify. So I'm assuming that the average insect has no idea what a Buddha statue is. It probably just perceives it as a large stone, and is just crawling over a large, slightly oddly shaped stone. So I think it is making only neutral karma, because I suspect it has no intentions, either positive or negative. I think it's just going about its life and has no idea what Buddha statues are. So I would also say it's not blessed, because it's just, from its perspective, it's just crawling over a big, oddly shaped rock. Now, could that put something in its mind stream that might eventually bring positive results? Maybe. Is being in proximity to a Buddha statue the result of good karma from past lives? Yeah. The problem is that being born as an insect kind of invalidates whatever good karma there might be there. So it's kind of beside the point. All you can really do is hope for a better rebirth and opportunity to learn the Dhamma. Insects are not known for their Buddhist practice. So those are my thoughts on the matter anyway. And we have a question here from Dharmika saying, how to face the differing and processes of dying? I don't know what they mean by differing, but can you talk about the process of dying?
Yeah. Please say if you want to add anything to this question, Dhamika. But I'll take it as how to face the different processes of dying. I think Buddhist practice is really helpful for us because it gives us a chance to prepare for the final death of the body, because it's so much part of our practice and the teachings of the Buddha to consider what's called maranasati, awareness of death. And so we're asked to consider the body and how it changes over time, and we're asked to consider our own death, and we're also asked to consider the death of everyone around us, everything around us. And so it's really good to be invited to reflect on these things, because we may not naturally want to go there. And in fact, our cultures are very kind of averse to facing up to this reality. There's a lot of denial around death. There's a lot of kind of wanting to hide it away and just avoid the issue. And so it's really very helpful to actually be encouraged to turn our attention to this aspect of reality, because actually when we contemplate death, we consider our own death, consider this body coming up to death and after death, it's actually very helpful, very calming, very peaceful, surprising. There can be some initial reluctance or difficulty contemplating death, but when we give it some time, give it some energy, we can find it extremely helpful. It gives a perspective on life that's very important for us, which is that life is finite, life is, transient. It gives us that sense of being able to stand in reality and find our ground there. So the Buddha taught the 3 characteristics, didn't he, of anicca, anatta, dukkha. So there's constant change. So in a way, one could say that actually when we really reflect on Maranasati, on death, we can see that it's happening in every moment. And every moment is a rebirth, every moment is a death. And when we start to recognize this aspect of reality, we can also really feel very differently about these processes that we call death, these very obvious processes, physical processes. Actually, is it really so? Is there really a final death at the end of life, or is death something that's with us all the time? Is it something we can really taste right now as the moment passes again and again? And so, it's really good to contemplate death, good to face these processes in terms of giving attention, giving energy, and considering deeply what is death? How does it manifest right now? How can I prepare myself so that when it comes to the big letting go at the end of life, I'm absolutely ready for that. I'm absolutely present for that. So these are just some thoughts on the matter.
Okay, thank you. And next we have a question here from Jason saying, how should one regard the suttas in the Digha Nikaya if they were written after the time of the Buddha? Well, this is getting into the question of the strata of the Buddhist teachings and the strata of the suttas in particular, and trying to discern the eras in which texts were composed or compiled or edited, and the question of what we can pretty reasonably say came directly from the Buddha and what might have come a little bit after, a lot after, a very, very long time after. Like this is all a very, very large question. And a lot of the answers are murky and uncertain. So more useful instead is to make an effort to understand the overarching principles of Dhamma and how to discern the flavor of Dhamma. Dhamma has a particular flavor, and that flavor runs through 99% of the Pali Canon, in particular of the Sutta Pitaka. About 99% of the Sutta Pitaka has a distinctive flavor. So reading through all the suttas, you'll start to pick up on what that flavor is, but you'll also start to notice where something has a different flavor. So again, most of the suttas have this distinctive Dharma flavor, but there's a few bits here and there which have a different flavor to them, and you'll notice that it's quite distinct once you start to pick up on this. And the percentage of things that don't taste right, so to speak, is substantially higher in the Digha Nikaya than in the other Nikayas. But there's still a tremendous amount of material in the Digha Nikaya that has that Dhamma flavor. So the Digha Nikaya as a whole is almost certainly of a later strata than the other three Nikayas. The Anguttara Nikaya also contains some material that's considered late, so after the Buddha. But the Digha Nikaya in particular appears to be, much of it seems to be compiled from bits and pieces elsewhere in the suttas that were later kind of cobbled together into Franken suttas, like Frankenstein style suttas, like stitched together out of other bits. But most of those individual bits are actually just perfectly fine Dhamma that we find elsewhere in the suttas. So for the most part, the Digha Nikaya actually has a lot of really good stuff in it, but there is also some strange anomalies, which once you've read through all the suttas, you'll be able to identify those anomalies. In the meantime, if there's anything in particular that strikes you as a bit strange or off color or off the mark, you can ask directly about those specific things. So you can say like, oh, in such and such a sutta and paragraph number so and so, it says this and that seems a bit strange. What do you think? And I can tell you what I think, whether I think that's genuine Dhamma, if I think it's a later corruption, I can let you know my opinion on the matter. Doesn't mean I'm right, it just means it's my opinion on the matter. Then we have a question here. So Daniel is saying, do any suttas say to contemplate asankhata? If yes, how? Do you have any thoughts on this? Contemplating the unconditioned?
I guess. Yeah, it's in the suttas, and the Buddha speaks about the unconditioned, and so then we can take that as an invitation to contemplate. It's a bit difficult for us because the thinking process is conditioned and all our experiences of the conditioned realm, and we're operating from past conditioning. So it's not easy for us to imagine what that might be, what that might mean. So I think the invitation from the Buddha is probably more to, practice, develop virtue, generosity, and mindfulness, and to investigate for ourselves what is conditioned. And as we let go of the conditions, perhaps we're moving in that direction of coming to some kind of understanding of the unconditioned. But it's an experiential process. To me, I think maybe better to, rather than trying to imagine or think about what it might be, to practice and see what we discover that way.
And Scott says, in a recent Dhamma talk, you discussed the causes and conditions for madness. There's an apt synopsis for one of the factors that intellectual proliferation on the nature of reality is a cause for madness. Well, if you're referring to the sutta that I talked about, I think it was yesterday morning or possibly the day before that, I don't remember. But the sutta I spoke yesterday, from the Anguttara Nikaya on the four imponderables, the four things not to think about or four things that can't be thought about, the Achinteya Sutta. I had actually started by arguing that I didn't think that madness was the correct translation of the word that appears in that sutta. So the word ummada, which was being translated as madness by one of the existing translators, I had said, well, actually, ummada is related to the word pamada, which means negligence. And it's also related to the word majja, which means intoxicant. So I had actually been making the argument that ummada doesn't mean insanity, but rather it has more meaning like distraction or blurry, hazy, unsettled, unstable mind, like the mind of someone who's drunk or high. So I think madness is a bit of an overstatement of the meaning of that word. It's more similar to distraction or intoxication, in my opinion. So is intellectual proliferation on the nature of reality a cause of insanity? Maybe, but I think that's a bit strong. But is it a cause for distraction? Is it a cause for mental agitation? Is it a cause for the mind becoming blurry and disturbed and unsettled and not particularly useful? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Could that eventually lead in the direction of insanity? I mean, maybe, but it does. I think that's kind of overstating what the Buddha was trying to say there, in my opinion. I think that's a bit farther than what he meant. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, in a way, I have the thought that intellectual proliferation sort of is a form of madness. And I'm just reminded of how the Buddha said we're all crazy until we're arahants. So just in that sense, it depends on your definition, of course. Madness, most people are mad, but within certain parameters that are acceptable in society. And so that's not called madness. You know, within that context, probably not. But in terms of the Buddha's teaching, you know, that the mind is pretty crazy until it isn't. You know, we're dealing with a wild mind. I actually find that quite comforting, that understanding, because okay, so if we manage some moments of peacefulness, or we manage to let go of some defilements that are confusing the mind, that's really good. We're moving in a good direction, and we're certainly moving towards greater sanity.
Yeah, thank you. And Daniel has a 3-part question. So, does Buddhism reject evolution? No, it doesn't. Yeah, I mean, evolution, there's no conflict there at all. And he continues, if humans are evolved creatures, at what point did they stop being animals and enter the human realm? Interesting point, by the way. The word creature is actually something that comes directly from theism. So creature means created. So the term creature is actually already implying that one believes in a creator deity. So just fun fact, I actually try to avoid using the word creature for exactly that reason. It doesn't quite fit in a Buddhist context, since we don't have the concept of a creator God. So at what point did evolving humans stop being animals and begin to be considered humans? You know, I've actually never really thought about that. You thought about this?
Well, my only thought about it really is that we are animals. You know, we haven't stopped being animals. I mean, it's my understanding that we're part of the animal kingdom. And it's interesting, though, how in Buddhism there's the animal realm and the human realm and the animal realm, right? So that there is a distinction between the two. And so there is a sense that as a human being, we're developed enough, our consciousness is developed enough, it's capable of insight, which maybe there's a sense that in the animal realm that's not possible, but I'm not sure really what the distinction is between us and other animal species. One thing I consider is that the Buddha taught human beings the precepts, and we're capable of understanding the precepts and of following the precepts, and maybe, you know, you could say that that makes us human. If we can keep the precepts, we're behaving then like human beings, you know, that we're capable of the kind of behavior that is harmless. And in the animal kingdom, you know, the beings there don't really have the opportunity to be completely harmless in the same way, because it's a survival of the fittest out there. And, you know, you watch animals and they're always, unless they're domesticated pets or animals that are grown for food, you know, in the wild, they're always looking around and looking out for danger and seeking prey. So it's a very, you know, fearful realm. And we human beings have been able to reduce the amount of fear that we have to experience because we're managing our surroundings in such a way that we have this opportunity for development. And so I've heard it said, that keeping the precepts makes one a human being. A person who doesn't keep precepts is really kind of very close to the animal realm. So that's just a thought on this topic.
Yeah, as for what divides animals and humans, and what comes to mind for me also is that the real important distinction is that humans can understand the Dhamma. And I think this is connected to our capacity for language and for intellectual thought. For example, there's a cat here at the monastery, and it's very difficult to explain the Dhamma to him because his language faculty is extremely minimal. So it's almost non-existent. And even the animals that have more advanced language faculties, such as some monkeys and chimpanzees and such, so some of the primates, they've been able to teach them to learn a few hundred words, but still not really enough to teach them Dhamma. So we're talking extremely minimal language skills. So without some quite advanced language skills, it's very difficult to come to any kind of understanding of the Dhamma, and therefore very difficult to practice the Dhamma. So in my opinion, that's the really critical distinction. So as Ayya Brahmavara was saying, the ability to understand precepts and practice self-restraint, and then further, sufficient linguistic and intellectual capacity for understanding the Dhamma, so that one knows how to practice Dhamma. And as for the question, are Homo sapiens the only beings in this realm? In my opinion, on this planet, probably yes. But could there be other planets elsewhere in this galaxy or in other galaxies which have sentient beings with human-like intelligence? And would they be classified as members of the human realm? In my opinion, yes. Though for some reason this isn't a particularly popular topic, but I'm actually of the opinion that yes, there are many human-like sentient species in the universe, and I would personally classify them as members of the Manusa Loka, of the human realm. That's my opinion anyway. Daniel continues, in many teachings, one needs to be 7 in order to enter the stream. By the way, that's not in the suttas anywhere. That was a later opinion. It wasn't found in the suttas. Some development happens then. A few animal species are said to be at this level. Is it possible they're in the human realm? I think I just gave my opinion on that. Do you have a thought on this?
I think there's just that case, isn't there, of the 7-year-old arahant. So I guess that's maybe where it comes from. That was the youngest arahant at the time of the Buddha, was age 7. Ada?
Yeah, I think that's where it comes from, but it never specifically says that's the minimum age.
No. Is it possible that animals and humans have different chronology, don't they? Sort of cats live, I don't know, is it 13 years or so, something like that. So of course they mature more quickly. But I guess we do, I think, especially what you said, Bhante, about the intelligence of humans, the language skills of humans, we do have that kind of distinction. I mean, maybe other animal species do have language, like dolphins or whales, but we just don't know. It's such a very different realm. It's difficult for us to really know what is the consciousness of an animal, of all the different species as well. There would be great differences. But it seems from our perspective, from what we know, that we're the ones who can practice for liberation. And it doesn't look like other animal species have that potential.
That's an interesting question, though, because dolphins supposedly have extremely advanced, for animal standards anyway, supposedly have very advanced intellectual and linguistic capacity.
Yeah.
So I wonder if the Buddha was telepathically communicating with dolphins and taught them the Dhamma.
Yeah.
They might have their own Dhamma culture that we don't even know about.
You never know. They could even have their own Buddha, maybe a dolphin.
Dolphin Buddha? Dolphin Arhat. Well, it'd be dolphin Arhats. They may have just never developed beyond the aniconic stage of Buddhism, so they never made Buddha statues.
Right, which is probably really good. I mean, it's very mature, isn't it? Not to have done that. So
also, no books, so it would have been kept at the oral tradition. Yeah. Theoretically possible, but I don't know enough about dolphins. Yeah. I was actually surprised to find out that octopi, an octopus also has an extremely advanced brain. Yeah. But we normally don't even consider them because they're so
different.
Yeah. But then I think of an octopus meditating, and I'm like, sure, why not?
Yeah, totally.
And they'd be flexible enough to sit full lotus. Daniel continues, if one needs to be 7 in order to enter the stream, how can a Sotapanna or Sakadagami be reborn into a body younger than this? And what would their qualities be? Would they still hold the insights? Yeah, so I think that's actually one proof that this kind of hard limit of 7 is not reliable. But what I have heard, and this is not actually from the sutta, so take it with a grain of salt, but what I've heard is that if somebody attains stream entry or once return, and then they're reborn again as a human, they will still, from the moment they're born, they'll still have that sense of selflessness, that sense of like that this body and mind is just a natural process. So a clear sense that this is not me, this is not who I am. But it won't be until their brain is sufficiently developed for them to, again, have the sufficient linguistic and intellectual capacities that for them to really comprehend what that means. So they still won't have that kind of core self-identity that the rest of us have. But it's only once they reach a certain level of intellectual development that they'll really comprehend why that's so important, why that's so significant. This is what I've been told anyway. I don't know how true it is.
That really makes sense to me, because it's like a great forgetting, isn't it? To have to go through rebirth, to have to come back into the womb, to have to learn everything again, how to speak and so forth. And my sense is probably, if one is reborn as a Sotapanna, Sakadagami, there would be this forgetfulness, and then we have to go through the whole selfing process again that infants go through, where they start to name themselves and relate to themselves as somebody separate from the outside world, and all of that development would have to happen and then be seen through, but maybe seen through very quickly. And then there would be some perhaps experience of coming into contact with the Dharma teachings at some point, and bing, a great sense of recognition.
Yeah. So next question, Jeng says, why Theravada seem to reject Mahayana Buddhism? Well, I would also ask, why does Mahayana seem to reject Theravada Buddhism? That would be an equally valid question. But actually, the truth is that we can't really talk about Theravada Buddhism and Mahayana Buddhism, but rather we can talk about individual Buddhist practitioners. So if you ask me if I reject Mahayana, then I would say, why no? I actually quite like Mahayana. And I think Mahayana Buddhism provides a wonderful set of tools for attaining awakening, and that for many people, it's exactly what they need. And I would also say the same about Theravada Buddhism. I think Theravada Buddhism has a lot of wonderful tools that are really helpful for many people. So I think that actually it's important for any practitioner to explore the different forms of Buddhism and try to figure out which style of Buddhism seems to be particularly effective for them. Of course, you do find people who reject other forms of Buddhism, and I mean, that's their choice, and they have their own reasons for that. But it isn't universal. So not every person who practices in a Theravada style rejects Mahayana, and not every person who practices Mahayana rejects Theravada. And there's a surprising number of people who quite freely integrate the two without any conflict or difficulty. So I don't necessarily see rejection here as being the default stance. And usually rejection comes from simply lack of understanding. I actually quite like to have debates with Mahayana practitioners, because usually after a little bit of conversation, it becomes clear that they just don't know what Theravada is. So what they're rejecting is actually something of their own imagination. And similarly, a lot of Theravada people, when they think they're rejecting Mahayana, but actually they just don't understand what Mahayana is. So once again, they're just rejecting something from their own imagination. So usually once one has sufficient knowledge and experience of the other forms of Buddhism, then one starts to realize that they're actually not so bad. And I have a question here from Julie. Julie says, I was abused growing up and cut family ties for 20 years. I got back with them and asked for a member for an apology. Surprisingly, I'm stronger than this member and I can meditate, but they are suffering severely from PTSD from the war during the abuse and still today. What is my responsibility and how to know when to speak and when not to speak? My thoughts were that it was wholesome to heal together by not pretending everything is fine after 20 years. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's really wonderful to hear how you feel resourced, you feel strong, and you have your practice, and that you've been able to face up to what has happened to you, and even to continue to relate to your abuser and to have an ongoing relationship with them. And of course, relationships are complex, aren't they? And that's not the only thing that's happened between you, but wonderful that you can shine some light on those difficult experiences that you had. And I really pick up a sense of compassion towards that person who harmed you. And yeah, even in your question and your sharing, you're giving us a sense of how troubled that person has been and how much suffering they're carrying, and how much themselves they are psychologically marred and damaged. And so it's beautiful, isn't it, to recognize that with the practice we can open to the bigger picture again and again, and really see more dimensions, more angles on things. And that is so helpful for us to forgive and to understand why terrible things happen. And, to understand karma, that there's cause and effect. And so my sense is, yeah, you're doing the good work, and listening to that person, being with that person, your forgiveness will no doubt transmit itself to that person and give them some peace, give them some resolution, some healing. Just as you've been able to heal, to the extent that you've been healing, that person can also let go and do some healing. And as much as you feel you can, to practice metta for that person, have compassion for that person. It's really important to take care of ourselves and make sure that we're okay when facing up to difficult past situations with others, but then to see where there's strength and where you have resources, and share anything good that you can with that person. May they be well, may they be happy, may they be free from suffering. So very beautiful, very lovely to hear about this situation, and really wish you well with the ongoing process of healing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Aya. Yeah. And we have a question here from Rick. He says, can you speak to the benefits of being quiet and being a good listener? Yes. So this actually is can be quite a challenging practice. But one really, really useful thing is when somebody else is speaking, to listen patiently until they're actually completely finished. And while they're speaking, really focus on trying to be present with what they're saying. Actually, one technique which I found quite useful is while the other person is speaking, I'll be repeating in my mind what they're saying. So kind of like I'm echoing what they're saying with my own thoughts. And this has a couple interesting effects. One is, well, first of all, it kind of requires me to pay attention rather than kind of like drifting off and spacing out and like, are they done yet? But instead actually paying attention, like, what are they saying? And repeating it in my mind kind of really hits home what they're actually saying. But also when we repeat the person's words with our own mind, then we start to inhabit those words. And as we inhabit those words, then we start to actually feel what the person is saying on a deeper level. So this is a practice that I found quite useful and that I do recommend trying out. So when somebody is speaking, echo their words in your mind. I don't recommend doing this out loud, by the way, because that's weird and confuses people. But do it silently in your own mind. I actually knew somebody who would do this out loud, and it was actually quite distracting. So silently, not out loud. And one of the things that this also will do, by the way, is that then you'll start to realize how incredibly self-centered you are. And this is not unique to you, of course. This is a quite universal phenomenon among unawakened beings. Because normally, what are we much more interested in than what the other person is saying? We're much more interested in what we want to say. And we're very interested in seeing when we can cut the other person off and start saying what we want to say. So by focusing instead on what the other person is saying and focusing on inhabiting their words, that's starting to let go of a big chunk of our self-centeredness, a big chunk of our fixation on me, which also is a very useful practice because this, again, is the central component of Buddhism. It's the relinquishment of self-centeredness. And of course, this also will tend to make other people like you more. People always love it when they feel like other people are paying attention to them and making an effort to understand them. And that's also an important thing, is that if you think you know what the other person is saying, it's also useful to confirm it with them. So instead of just assuming that you know what they mean, actually check and be like, so when you're saying such and such, do you mean XYZ? Or when you're saying that, it makes me think you mean such and such. So actually making the effort to confirm that you really are understanding what they're saying, rather than just going on assumptions. And this also is very useful because this often will help to illuminate how dramatically we misunderstand other people's experience. It can actually be really mind-blowing when somebody says something and you're like, oh, so what you're saying is XYZ. And they're like, no, that's not what I mean at all. That's not what I'm saying. And it's like, oh. So then you get to, once again, drop your own self-fixation and really make a strong effort to see through the other person's experience. So yeah, these are practices I found very useful. Also great for building up patience. And often it takes a lot of patience to sit through somebody else's long, boring statement. But as you continue practicing this, then that power of patience becomes stronger and stronger. And you'll see that starts to bleed into the rest of your life. So the capacity to be patient, to be tolerant, to be caring becomes stronger. And one last bit on this is to practice metta when the other person is speaking. So really genuinely wishing for them to be happy. And that also is a way of transforming the mind. So those are a few general thoughts. And hello to Ajahn Nisabo and Ajahn Kovilo. Happy to see you checking in, Venerables. And I also hope you'll come and visit us sooner rather than later. And Zhang asks, what is Mara? What is Mara?
Well, in Buddhism, Mara is a sort of personification of delusion. Mara is said to be a being from a Devaloka, so quite a powerful being who likes to be a kind of trickster, to deceive us, to delude us, and to lead us astray. And the Buddha was visited by Mara many times, famously when the Buddha was sitting under the Bodhi tree the night that he became the Buddha. Siddhartha was sitting under the Bodhi tree and was assailed by the armies of Mara, we're told. all the different forces, the defilements, fear and anger and lust and so forth. He was assailed by the armies of Mara. So there's a sense of Mara as some sort of being in Buddhism, but also Mara, you can say, is delusion. And it's our ability to be led astray and to not recognize reality and to be confused and deluded. So Mara's both this sense of a figure, like a demon or a devil kind of thing, and also we can take Mara as that which is within us that will tend to lead us off the path. And so we want to be vigilant and on the lookout for Mara, and to say, I see you, Mara, when we're caught up in some sort of obstacle, some sort of defilement. And the quicker we can recognize Mara, the quicker these defilements can be overcome. Mara tends to be very, in the suttas, when Mara appears to the Buddha or to any of the Arahants and they say, I see you, Mara, then Mara becomes very disheartened. There's these wonderful descriptions of Mara's brow creasing and his head hanging down and this dejected figure. So once we see the obscurations, they will tend to fade away. They don't stand up very well to scrutiny. So Mara's very shy of being seen. Once Mara's seen, Mara's defeated, potentially.
Great, thank you. And Jason asks, are the components of first jhana supposed to be actively cultivated, parenthesis, joy, pleasure, or are they a consequence of simply remaining on one's meditation object? Well, there's different ways of talking about it. And of course, as one's samadhi grows stronger, as one's concentration develops, then the euphoria and joy tends to start to arise naturally. But also deliberately cultivating and strengthening that euphoric joy is also something which will directly support the growth of concentration. So it's actually both. So deliberately cultivating that euphoric joy will strengthen your concentration, and also strengthening your concentration will tend to build up that euphoric joy. And so building these two together will tend to accelerate the development of your samadhi practice. Then we have, what's the place here? Julie says, can someone please spell the being a realm that Bhante just said? I think I said Manusa Loka. I think that's what you're talking about. Manusa means human and Loka means world. So Manusa Loka, human world, it usually means the form of rebirth, which we call human. And I was making the argument that that doesn't necessarily mean only Homo sapiens per se, but could also include other forms of life that have similar characteristics. And Hai Eng says, how can rites and rituals affect our spiritual practice? Will they influence us to reject the true Dhamma? What do you think?
I think it's up to us, isn't it, Bhante? It's good, though, to recognize that, we can have a sort of magical thinking around rites and rituals where we might think that if I perform such and such a ritual, it's going to purify my heart for me. And that's not, the case. But we can use rites and rituals as a way of helping us in our practice. We do every day in the monastery, pretty much. We engage in rites and rituals. We might bow to the Buddha. We might offer incense, light incense, offer incense. We have flowers on the shrines and so forth. And we do chanting, which is ritualistic. Actually, a lot of the chanting is really good Dhamma. When we reflect on the words, it's all good teachings. But nevertheless, chanting is a ritual, and pujas and so forth. But we can use these things. For instance, when we all come together and we bow to the Buddha, there's a great sense of communion. We're all on the same page. We've come together in a way of respecting the teacher, respecting the teachings, and it sort of sets the tone of a meeting. This kind of thing. When you see someone else bowing when they come into a room, there's a sense of, well, this is somebody who respects the Buddha, who's a peaceful person, who is here to develop on the Eightfold Path. And when we come together to do chanting, pujas and so forth, we have a chance to arrive. When we're chanting, we're kind of ideally conscious of the body chanting, and when we make sound, the body reverberates with that sound, and it helps us to come into awareness of the body, and to bring the mind to the teachings of the Buddha, to bring the mind into the space, to begin to settle into any particular space, any particular room, any particular session. And so rites and rituals can be a way of coming together, connecting with each other in a peaceful way and arriving. And then we can sit and meditate perhaps a little bit more easefully because we've set the scene for ourselves. So rites and rituals can be very helpful if we use them as tools, as aids, as skillful means for our practice. And yes, they can maybe have a malign influence if we are not very sensible around what is their actual function and what are their limitations.
Okay. And Haiyang also asks, are morality, concentration, and wisdom only the path to enlightenment, but not the essence of Buddhism? Is the essence of Buddhism peace? So the essence of Buddhism is relinquishment. The essence of Buddhism is renunciation, non-attachment. That's the essence of Buddhism. And the practices of morality, concentration, and wisdom are how we bring the mind in the direction of the most profound relinquishment, which is the relinquishment of self-identity. And that's what we call full awakening. Full awakening is actually when you let go entirely of self-identity. And is that peace? Yes, that's peace. It's also joy. It's also understanding. And Jen says, is it normal for energy to keep wavering? Body is best to stabilize or flow with it? Do you understand what? I don't understand.
Well, energy is something definitely to consider in our practice. And we have many teachings from the Buddha where he talks about how to get the right sort of balance of energy. So he gives descriptions, lovely similes, like tuning a lute or a guitar to just get the right note. You want the strings to be, not too tight, not too loose. Another simile he gives is crossing a river. If we go too fast, we might lose energy halfway through and the current may sweep us away. We might get too tired, and not be able to sustain the passage across. On the other hand, if we go too slowly across a river, the current may overwhelm us because we're not moving against it enough. And so to get just the right amount of energy and pace in order to get across the river is quite a balancing act. And it's very helpful then to consider energy in our practice and notice, is there too much? Is there too little? How can I actually balance the energy? And we can do this. And in fact, when we pay attention to energy, it's very easy to maintain a degree of awareness. Because there it is, as you say, the body sort of wavering, the body sort of vibrating or thrumming with energy. And if we pay attention to that energy in certain ways, we can notice it calming, and in other ways we can notice it increasing. And so we can work with these things. And when we're sitting in meditation, for instance, we can notice if the hindrances of restlessness, too much energy, or sloth and torpor, too little energy, are manifesting, and then we can tweak and sort of fine-tune the energy. So how do we bring down the restless energy? If the energy is too high, it's really helpful to focus more. So to actually maybe narrow down the field of awareness and really get into, say, focusing on a particular part of the body or focusing on an aspect of the breath. And just to increase the amount of focus, we can notice then the energy will slowly come down. On the other hand, if we have sloth and torpor, the energy is too low. How do we bring the energy up? Well, we can stand up, we can open our eyes, we can walk around, we can take deep breaths and so forth. We can sit up straight, have a good upright posture. This is something really worth noticing, is how the posture affects the energy in the body. And when we're slumping over, sagging here and there, then we tend to lose energy. And when we straighten up and take a big breath, the energy will come back for us. And so in all these ways, we can work with energy, and it's really helpful to observe it, because then we can be very sharp and very mindful around how we're practicing.
And Zheng asks, can the Dharma learned in this life be remembered in the next life? It can be. But the chance of that happening is strongly connected to, first off, how thoroughly and deeply have we learned it, and also how thoroughly and deeply have we practiced it. And one thing which does make a difference is to memorize Dhamma texts. So this is one reason why Buddhist monks commonly will memorize many passages from the suttas or from the Dhamma. There's actually a sutta where the Buddha says that if you memorize the suttas, then in your next life, you might remember what you've memorized. And that can help you get back on the track of Buddhism. So that is actually one of the big benefits of memorizing suttas or Dhamma passages. And of course, the more deeply you practice the Dhamma, then the stronger imprint it will make on your mind. And therefore, the more likely that you will remember in future lives. Okay. And Karuna says, could you share any reflections on practicing through the experience of illness? I tried to do recollections, but ended up observing a lot of craving and rising and falling of Vedanas. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good, obviously, very good time to practice when we have illness. Often that can mean for us, isn't it, we're less mobile, we're maybe a bit incapacitated. We might find ourselves lying in bed, and this is a great opportunity for meditation. And indeed, what else is there to do? The practice really comes into its own when we're sick, when we're incapacitated. And so it's a really important time to practice, and then we can practice with whatever symptoms, whatever situation we find ourselves in. You tried to do recollections, but ended up observing a lot of craving, rising and falling of Vedanas. I would say observing rising and falling of Vedanas, feeling, that's great. If we can be aware of the body, be aware of feeling in the body, the changing nature of Vedana, the rising and passing of feelings, that's really great. The mind can rest there. But if you found that was difficult, that brought up a lot of craving, maybe for a different situation, maybe not to be feeling the way you were feeling, I'm just guessing, then you can change your practice. And very helpful to pay attention to the breath. I found personally, this is not for everyone, but when we're lying there or sitting and we really have very low energy, we're not well, there may be pain and discomfort in the body, well, we can observe the breath. It's generally fairly neutral, and it does keep the attention because it's constantly changing. And so just to breathe deeply, and to breathe deeply into areas that are uncomfortable from time to time can be very soothing, very helpful. This is just one suggestion. There are many other things one can do. To pay attention to sound, for instance, or to pay attention to just whatever, temperature in the room, whatever is apparent to us that isn't too overwhelming to rest in. So if there's a lot of pain, just bring the attention to some other aspect of experience and allow it to rest there. The Buddha, when he was sick, and also other practitioners at the time of the Buddha, when they were sick, they would ask to have recited to them the 7 factors of enlightenment. So it's really interesting. The Buddha asked his disciples to recite the 7 factors of enlightenment to him. And we have chants around this story of all the different practitioners at the time of the Buddha requesting contemplation of these 7 factors. So it just comes to mind as a possible way to contemplate the teachings that might work for you. It worked for the Buddha. So the 7 factors of enlightenment is actually very uplifting to consider these qualities that develop as we practice. The hindrances fall away, the 7 factors of enlightenment grow. So that's, just one possible way in which you can apply your mind to bring in the 7 factors of enlightenment.
Great, thank you. And Edward says, I've been going to a Zen class 1 day a week. It's the only group meditation close to me. There are no Dhamma talks and they appear not interested. Am I hurting my practice? Well, ultimately you need to ask yourself whether it's helping your practice or harming it. But I'm inclined to say that if there's a group of people who are doing group meditation and you go and you practice together with them, even if there's no Dhamma talks, that's still a good thing because it's an external support for your practice. And even if they're not interested in Dhamma talks, at least they're interested in doing meditation. And at least you have some sense of group support for your meditation. So I wouldn't worry about trying to change what they're doing. If they're not interested in Dhamma talks, well, they're not interested in Dhamma talks. Rather, I would just focus on appreciating what they are doing. So it's actually wonderful that you have a meditation group that is close by you. A lot of people don't have even that. So I would just appreciate that they meditate together and appreciate that there's a group where you can go and meditate with them. And if they're not interested in Dhamma talks, well, that's fine. Use other resources to get your Dhamma, but still appreciate the fact that you do have a group of people that you can meditate together with in person. And it looks like that's the last question. So if there's nothing else, we'll go ahead and wrap up at this time. So I think that's it. So we'll go ahead and end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And if you're in the area, please feel free to come to the monastery for our Saturday evening program and our Sunday day long. It's always good to have people coming for in-person practice. Otherwise, we'll see you for our live streams next week.